Hello and a warm welcome to episode 10 of Inspiring Psychologists, Breaking the Mould of Private Practice. I'm Wendy Kendall, your host, a psychologist and private practice coach. Today we're shedding light on an incredibly significant topic, from stigma to empowerment, changing the narrative on neurodiversity in private practice. We'll be diving deep into the compelling journeys of our three guests, Dr. Emma Offord from Divergent Life, Dr. Katie Adolphus of the Adolphus practice, and Dr. Lola Perez-Gavino from Mind Made Easy. This episode promises to inspire, challenge, and change your perspective as we explore the pivotal role private practices can play in supporting neurodiverse individuals and families, whilst also pushing back against conventional norms and misconceptions. As we discuss neurodiversity and neurodivergence, the spirit of breaking the mould of private practice truly resonates. Our conversation covers the necessity of revolutionising traditional approaches within the psychological professions to support neurodivergence more effectively, with a focus on understanding neurodiversity as a social justice movement. In this inspiring dialogue, we explore how important it is for neurodivergent individuals to find and own their voice. We delve into how a neuro-affirming approach is disrupting traditional ways of assessing and diagnosing neurodivergence, challenging the mental health system, and redefining the medical model of mental health and psychology. If you're seeking to create lasting positive change through your work, this episode is a must listen. Join the conversation in our Inspiring Psychology Practices Facebook group. And for more resources and information about our guest today, visit our website at inspiringpsych.com. That's inspiringpsych.com. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Inspiring Psychologists podcast, where we're breaking the mold of private practice. And in this week's episode, we are going to be speaking with three inspiring practitioners who have developed and set up practices that focus on neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And I'm really looking forward to introducing their work to you. So we're going to be speaking with Dr. Katie Adolphus, Dr. Emma Offord, and Dr. Lola Perez-Gavino. So I'm going to invite you all in now. Welcome all of you to this episode where we're talking about changing the narrative on diversity in private practice. So lovely to see you all. I'm really glad the tech is working and we're keeping our fingers crossed that it's going to carry on working. And it's lovely to see your faces. So I'm going to come across to you first, Katie, if that's all right, for a bit of an intro, and we'll kind of go round. So Katie, tell us a little bit about you and your practice.
Okay, hi. So I'm a clinical psychologist and have been for many years. I've been working in the independent sector for approximately 15 years. And over the course of my total career, been working a lot with the neurodivergent community. And so my practice now provides assessments of neurodivergence and autism, ADHD. And I have a team of clinical psychologists, speech and language therapists, an OT, and some coaches as well to provide assessments and support.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. So Emma Offord, Dr. Emma Offord, over to you. A little bit of an intro. Hi.
Sure. So like Katie, I'm a clinical psychologist, trained in the NHS and worked in the NHS, mainly in physical health services, and moved into private practice and had a very, broad range of referrals. and over time decided to niche and sort of working with yourself, developed Divergent Life, which, similar to Katie, works with neurodivergent individuals, doing assessment, screening, coaching, therapy. And we are a neuro-affirming practice. We're not as large as yours, Casey. There's only really. I'm the clinical psychologist part, and then my colleague Jolene is a trained counsellor and works in the arts as well. So it's quite a holistic practice in terms of the different, we hope, neuro-affirming therapies that we offer.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Emma. And over to Dr. Lola Perez-Gavino. A little bit of an intro from you, Lola.
Hi. Well, yes, I am also a clinical psychologist. And I used to work for the NHS. There was a bit of an overlap between me working in the NHS and private practice for a few years. But now I just work privately, and I run my small clinic, which is just me, really. The things I do are mainly therapy, and I offer autism assessments as well. The main things that I do are trauma work, using EMDR and working with anxiety. And my autism assessments, I decided to maybe not, focus, I guess, because I have a lot of experience and an interest in high masking autism, which is what we normally see in private practice. I mean, very, very often when people have gone through their, whole lives thinking that they were different and that there was something about them that was different, and maybe not everybody or no one noticed until they are adults. And I'm very, very interested in that kind of journey. That's me.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm really curious about your kind of journey into working in this area in your private practices, because I think, like so many of us in private practice, there always seems to be a kind of evolution and a path that we take, right? It's not just it's not some kind of almost like mechanistic decision that is taken. There's always some kind of personal as well as professional path that gets people into this or into a particular area in their private practice. So I guess if I'm going to mix it up a little bit. If I can come across to you, Emma, because you mentioned there that you worked, for example, in physical health, and then you'd worked in different areas, and then there was a certain path into developing a neuro-affirming private practice, which was it's a slightly different take on this area, right? So what made that so important to you that you wanted to focus on that in your private practice?
Yeah, it's quite a long story, so I'll do to shorten it. But when I look back now, although I was working in physical health, I was working in the medically unexplained symptom aspects of physical health for quite a long time. I was also working in chronic conditions, but those medically unexplained symptoms were often what I now see in many neurodivergent clients. So I think there was some seeds sown way back then that I didn't quite understand as a psychologist. Why were there these groups of people that weren't being served by the NHS from a physical health point of view? They were being sent to psychology and psychiatry, and their physical health symptoms were being seen as purely a kind of psychological process, which is still a biological process because our head isn't detached from our bodies.
Yes.
So, I sort of began noticing that. And then I started private practice. So like you, Lola, I was doing both for a while. And initially taking any referral that came in, trying to sort of work out private practice work. And then I noticed some patterns, really, which I started off discussing with you at some point, didn't I, Wendy, around what you typically through a medical model would call OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That type of presentation just kept showing up and showing up. And so I did lots of research and discovered the neurodiversity paradigm shift, where these labels and these diagnoses were coming under a very different lens of neurobiological understanding,
Right.
as trauma and contextual and social understandings. But it was creating a different language for understanding what was happening for people. So I just became really hooked on that, because it was moving away from a medical model and looking at people for their differences, but not their disorder and not their illness. It wasn't using that language. It was trying to understand people in a way that I have always understood mental health. So that really fit for me. And then I guess the more I looked into it, and looking into this area of neurodivergence, and then I think it just sort of, like you say, that with that evolution, reflecting back on the clients that I've been working with, and why years and years and years of mental health therapy and different diagnoses for them hadn't kind of really helped them. Whereas this understanding was really resonating and helping people. So that was really the inspiration for it, or the evolution of it. I mean, there's lots of things that have happened since then, but that, I guess that's really the beginnings. Started Divergent Life.
Right. And I remember at the time of our conversations around your particular interest in OCD, I remember some of the conversations that I'd had generally with practitioners where people had been showing up in their practices with challenges like that, where they had felt that that was kind of intractable. They, it felt as though there was a broader swathe of practitioners who were kind of almost like running into a wall in terms of making breakthroughs with people that were experiencing those kinds of symptoms. And I remember your absolute kind of fascination for really drilling into what was happening here. And I think it started with looking at safe and sound protocol, and then it kind of blossomed from there in a way. And kind of the path evolved at that point.
So maybe this is some of the physical side of things that I'm also very passionate about, the neurobiological. There's one theory called the polyvagal theory, which very much focuses on the central nervous system. And so in my years of researching neurodivergence, this just became a really important theme. And also, like you, Lola, trauma is at the heart of what I do, and using a trauma lens. So it kind of married the two together. So yes, the safe and sound protocol is a music technology that speaks to the nervous system, which for some people is a really beautiful therapy, because they don't have to talk all the time and work things out. They can have like a safe nervous system experience through, co-regulation with myself or with my colleague, and learn physical skills of regulation, which is that bottom-up approach, which again I think is a very neuroaffirming and developing concept, which I believe is really helpful to people, not only the sort of more traditional cognitive top-down therapies. I think they work brilliantly for lots of people, but not always, and not in the first. And so I think this is what a lot of people were struggling with, that they were failing therapy and being told that they had the right insight, wasn't the right time. But I think it was the wrong therapy for a lot of them. So, yeah, that's also part of this broader picture, is what else can we develop? What are neuroaffirming therapies for people? That break this one-to-one, or maybe group work. That's kind of, what other things can we do? And ultimately help the psychology and well-being of people.
Yeah. And you referred to Lola's work a couple of times. I'm going to come across to you, if that's okay, Lola, to also kind of get some sense of that journey for you into developing this private practice and why it was important to you. But one of the things I really remember, picking up on some of Emma's points about different ways of helping people to feel safe, if you like, in their nervous system, was the amount of creativity you brought into your practice. I remember, that you developed some really beautiful animations early on and so on. So, yeah, what was your kind of, why was this so important to you to take this, slightly different approach in terms of developing your practice?
Yeah, they are still very important. I wish I could do more, but it's hard work. But I do have a few ideas in progress. But animations and visual material and images and metaphors are things that I use a lot in my work. Analogies and lots of imagery, and it seems to work. Interesting that people think that autistic people and neurodivergent people have no imagination, and actually I find that metaphors, analogies, stories, they work so well. So I'm very sort of passionate about that, about stories, about the narrative that people the narrative that we carry with us throughout our experiences, and that for neurodivergent people, even if it's with the best intention, but people keep hearing messages about, you're not good, there's something wrong with you, you're different, and all those things, we kind of absorb, and then they show up in our, sometimes in childhood already, but in my experience, because I work with adults now, in adulthood, in ways that maybe we don't think or we don't realize where they are coming from. And I have found that EMDR, a bit like Emma, I guess, it's kind of, I have found, I am also a CBT therapist, and sometimes I combine both, but I think maybe EMDR, because I came a little bit later in my career to EMDR, there's so many options, there's so many ways of working with EMDR and bringing in different ideas. And I have found that it's provided me with so many resources to help people. And you were asking me about
just in terms of the evolution of your practice, and that journey of, I guess. So let me think about how to articulate my question more clearly. What happened that helped you to decide to start to focus much more on supporting neurodiversity and supporting people with neurodivergence in their in your practice or through your practice?
It's always been an interest of mine, and I guess throughout my career I've been working in places where I've come across neurodivergence a lot, and for some reason we just seem to work well together. So I tend to have sort of feedback from people. I think Emma also mentioned about therapies where sort of you don't need to talk a lot. So sort of I have skills and feel comfortable working with other tools that are not necessarily sort of asking people sort of further thoughts or further experiences. So there are ways that where people can feel safe and I guess once you start putting a few things out there and showing a little bit who you are as a therapist and as a psychologist, you know, sort of, because, I think now there are more people who are maybe specializing and training and becoming a little bit more confident working with neurodivergence. But a while ago, maybe it wasn't so much. So I guess neurodivergent people are looking for, sort of for people they feel comfortable with, and they offer things that will work for them. So that's my experience.
And you mentioned in your introduction as well, there was this link with, or there was something about working with people who were high masking autism. And, what was happening in your practice that made you think, this actually needs some attention. I'm going to put some specific attention on this.
I think I'm still, in the process of me, I think it's such a big topic, and it's really complex in the sense that, sort of the diagnosis patterns are changing. There is an increment in how many people are diagnosed. There is some kind of controversy, in terms of who, should be diagnosed and not, and things like that. But I think it all started in one of my jobs where I kept coming across lots of young people, teenagers, who were different. They had they came to camps, which is sort of one of the teams that I was working in, with depression, with anxiety, like really vague symptoms. No one knew what was going on, and I started reading about autism and autism in different aspects of autism, and that's where I started to learn a lot about high masking. And autism just seemed to answer, sort of be a possibility in terms of explaining who these people were, these young people, and what their experience was. And I just became really, really interested in that area. And I think in my evolution as someone doing assessments, has been maybe the change from doing assessments in the NHS, where the weight is on what the person doing the assessment is, sees. So sort of, do I see you as someone who is autistic, to maybe sort of shift a little bit to what's your experience, you coming here, talking to me and being here with me and telling me about your experience. So it's sort of, obviously it's very important, sort of the sort of what someone is observing and what's going to be used to see if someone meets the criteria, but also the person's experience, because a lot of people are making efforts to get by, and we don't realize that they are. So I remember that sort of discussions with my colleagues, where maybe someone said, but that was a very normal answer, to doing an assessment, or I don't think they were autistic, but maybe I sort of thought about it a little bit more in depth. But how is that person experiencing it? Are they making an effort? Are they tired? Are they uncomfortable? And doing it in my private practice has allowed me to do the assessments in a way that I hope makes people feel safe, confident, comfortable, and be able to show up a little bit more, telling me what their experience is, but maybe, sort of be able to do some stimming, or be able to regulate. I've had assessments where people were sitting on the floor. I've had, sort of assessments where people were holding things in their hands, sort of things that will make people feel comfortable. And because I think there is also an experience of quite difficult experience of assessments for some people, in terms of feeling that they put, sort of in a situation that is really unnatural for them. And
just to be really clear for people who don't know, what do you mean by high masking?
So high masking, and maybe Katie and Emma, you can add anything or correct me if you have any better ways of explaining it. But it's it's a range of behaviors that everybody uses. So we all use them to some degree in different situations. Like when you go to a job interview, we're generally masking, trying to show the best self. But in autism and in a number of sort of people, they use it more as a strategy to get by, and maybe they rely on masking more because maybe they don't know naturally how to behave, or they are worried about how they may come across. So masking is not necessarily a bad thing by itself, but in autism very often, because people feel that they have to do it, or they don't realize, but they keep doing it all the time. That's when the problem comes. And what I find is that very often people forget who they are. I don't know if you, Katie and Emma, find that people say, I don't even know who I am anymore because I feel like I'm masking all the time.
Yeah. That it's super interesting as well, Lola, in that I know that when I've been doing executive coaching, there have been times that I've spoken to people and I've literally heard them say, they've said, in certain situations, I need to mask who I am. And I don't offer neurodiversity coaching. I'm not trained in this area. I'm not a clinical psychologist. But when I guess the more I've worked alongside folks like you, the more I've started to hear these things happening. And as you said, then, if all of these criteria that were used to, let's say, assess someone have come from observing from the outside, and then you've got people who are really highly functional at masking what it looks like from the outside, then that makes sense that actually we need to think about how does it feel from the inside to be doing that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that insight. Katie, coming over to you. So you were kind of nodding and kind of...
it's interesting because I think my origin story, if you like, has got... is different, but I resonated with both Emma and Lola's stories.
Yes.
I started my career at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and for a little bit of my time there, I was involved in a neurodevelopmental assessment clinic. And coincidentally, a little bit of my time in unexplained medical symptoms, Emma, which
how interesting.
is really interesting to think, maybe the seeds were there in that part of the work as well. But I was really taken. I think one of the reasons I'm a psychologist is because I love people's stories. And I was really taken about how through an assessment, you could begin to tell a different story for a person, about them, about their place in the world, about and start stripping some of the negative labels that people collect along the way, and replacing them with more affirming, explaining ways of understanding themselves and retelling their stories in a validating way. This was a very, very long time ago. So the world of neurodiversity and autism was still very much entrenched in a deficit model. But I think I still saw that ability to tell a story that made an important difference, or retell a narrative that made an important difference. Via an excursion into working with youngsters who were care experienced, I then went back to my last role within the NHS was coordinating support for families in a local borough, kind of post-diagnosis, post-discovery of autism for their children. So my world had been becoming increasingly, full of neurodivergence and so as a family move, we moved away from London, and that's when I had to start myself up in an independent practice. And I held the doors really wide open, thinking, I don't know if there's a market here. I don't know what how this is going to go. So all comers. And actually the people who walked through the door, so many of them were neurodivergent, and in ways that either they were masking or in ways that would never have got over that threshold in the NHS. So it might be that their parents couldn't kind of describe and explain the challenges in a way that their GP would go, okay, I know what's needed here. But as soon as I could open the door and say, well, just come and we'll work out from there, because there isn't a barrier, there isn't a referral threshold. And so they came, and what we discovered ultimately was that they were neurodivergent, and that was the helpful way of understanding their story.
Yes.
And so more and more of my clients were neurodivergent, and it became more and more sensible and more exciting for me to go, actually, I don't need to know everything about everything. What I really need to do is understand how to be the best therapist, the best psychologist, the best person that does these discovery assessments that I can be for the neurodivergent community. And alongside that, there's neurodivergence in my family. So it was a coming together of my world, really.
Yes. Yeah.
That brought me to this point where my practice is specifically for neurodivergent people.
Yeah, there's something that all of you have kind of spoken to and spoken for there that I think is profoundly important for us to kind of get the message out there, which is when there is an area in psychology that is not well understood, not coherent, then gatekeeping access to professionals through people being able to articulate in a certain way what their needs are is like setting up people for failure, right? Yeah. So when we have a situation, I didn't watch this Panorama documentary last week, I've heard people describe what was going on. I've read some newspaper articles about it. But this whole thing about, is there an unnecessary explosion in the diagnosis of people who aren't really, then that kind of, what you're saying kind of really speaks to me there, because you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, when we have inappropriate filters for what this should look like, and actually what we're doing is which is actually more of a scientific way of doing things, which is opening up the conversation about and getting curious about it, first of all, rather than having these pre-fit pigeonholes that people need to match before they can receive any support. Am I way off track here? Am I understanding this? What's your thoughts on that?
So one of my thoughts, and I start to get kind of like a fight-flight response when I think about some of these discussions, because I haven't watched the Panorama. I thought it might sort of be a bit triggering to watch it, actually. But I think what can get forgotten in all of this, that it's not only incremental change working in a different way, one-to-one with people and families. It's a movement. It's a social justice movement. And, it's grassroots. It's from service users or neurodivergent, self-identified neurodivergent individuals. It's not just coming from private services or other kind of experts. It's coming from people who are doing their own research, who are confronted with a system that is letting them down. That's not everybody, but many people. And they're creating this movement. And so I see a lot of the work that I do as part of that movement and part of using the skills I have, and I guess the voice that I have, the platform that you can have as a clinical psychologist, to advocate on behalf of those individuals and families. I see a lot of families in crisis. They can't get access. If they are being given access, they're being asked to write a letter justifying their assessment, or they've got a waiting list of 2 to 5 years, and their child isn't able to access school, getting any education.
Right.
That's the part that needs to also be investigated and looked at, is
quite
being men that are being the gatekeepers are saying, I'm sorry, you're too social, or you're making too much eye contact for a neurodivergent person, and all those stereotypes, which are anecdotal. I've not witnessed that myself, but this is what my clients come to me and tell me. So I think it's beyond, it's that transformational change that we're part of when you're a neurodivergent, neuroaffirming clinician. So and if you guys would agree with that.
I think I'm really interested by that, because I think that there's been a recent critical mass that's allowed people I sense a kind of permission giving to say, as a clinician, actually, yes, there are people around me who agree with me. I'm not a lone person saying a thing. And as you say, Emma, there's a huge neurodivergent community finding their voice, which is a glorious thing. And it feels like that impetus has really, really grown. So I wonder whether there have been lots of people. I know for myself, a lot of the stuff that is being said now in a neuroaffirmative way, I was thinking, but didn't feel like I had permission to push that boundary professionally for quite a while. And it's really freeing to now say, oh, actually, there's a body of people around us that are on the same page. And that makes me feel a degree of hope, even though the systems and structures that we work in are as they are.
Yeah. And Lola, I notice you kind of nodding your way through that as well.
I mean, I agree with everything that has been said, and I'm very aware of, sort of some of the sort of ideas and positions that are out there in terms of, sort of these, people who have managed to get through life without a diagnosis, and are they really, really autistic? And I don't know if it is fortunately or unfortunately, but there are, people wouldn't think of, am I ADHD? Am I autistic? For no reason. So that's one of the questions for me. So people feel different, people struggle, and then they ask the question like, why? And then they look into neurodivergence, and it could be anything, because it could be dyslexia, it could be, it could be anything that makes you different from the majority. And it is an explanation. People feel comfortable, people feel normal. So for me, in that sense, I think if the community is brilliant, it's brilliant that there is a community out there and that people belong. And at the moment, the way things are set up, it just seems like, there is a diagnosis, but maybe, I don't know where things are going to go, in what direction are we going to start seeing, different, neurodiversity in a different way. And hopefully there will be a time when people don't even need to, like, at the moment, I feel like people need a diagnosis to get support. I think that's what Emma was saying, isn't it? So hopefully we get to the point where people say, well, I cannot work in a room full of people making noise, and you don't need to say I am autistic to be able to get a space that is appropriate, or, the light bothers me. Now you have to go with the, sort of say, look, this is why I need, well, actually, everybody needs a space that works for them, or, sort of an ADHD person to be able to get up and move around, or, whatever it is that they need, without having to sort of feel like you need this label to get the support. But it's complex, isn't it? Like, so many layers that
it is. And it kind of, when you talk about responding to people's needs like that, I mean, goodness me, we're not talking about having to, dismantle the whole world. Do you know what I mean? It seems like what is being asked for, actually, a lot of the time, is in itself not some kind of huge adjustment somehow, huge departure from what other people have put up with. And yet it gets layered with so much politics, because a person is asking for something to help them with something. But
I think it's that confusion, isn't it, between asking for accommodations so that the world works for you, and people's confusions about equality, because you're supposed to treat everybody the same, but actually equality and it's equality of opportunity. And so that might be providing different things for different people so that their opportunities are equal. And I think that people get tripped up about that, because there's an assumption that equality means providing the same thing, and it doesn't. It means that the outcome has to be the same. The outcome in terms of opportunity and availability for growth and to reach your potential is equal.
So removing barriers to people growing, as necessary,
really, isn't it?
Right. Exactly.
Providing people what they need to thrive, because again, there is this idea that, you are neurodivergent, you cannot have a job, you cannot keep a job, you cannot have a family, you cannot have a relationship. Yes, you can, with the right support, with the right understanding, in the right environment. And I think that's one of the things, I don't know if you, Katie and Emma, find that, but a lot of people who come to see me who don't believe that they are able to, or that have those beliefs around themselves in terms of how far they can get.
Yeah, I think that's been the narrative throughout many people's lives, hasn't it? Of trying, the square peg round hole experience of, you need to change. This is standard, expectation. This is the norm. This is the school uniform you must put on. This is the meal you must eat that I've served you. And fighting against your sensory preferences, your kind of ways of processing information, like what you were saying, Lola. Even in therapy, we need to change the way that we help people process information. We can't just do it in a intense eye contact talking way all of the time. Even kind of 50 minutes is a bit artificial. Why does it have to be 50 to 60 minutes? Why can't it be something else? but yeah, just shifting that understanding that it's not an I won't, it's I need. So in order to be able to listen, learn, engage, feel safe, smile, be happy. And same, I love what you said there, Katie, about equality. I think that's just so spot on.
Absolutely.
Something also, I mean, this is episode 10 now of this first series. And what I've realized from having these conversations is there's always something that people say that really kind of, that is like my paradigm shift in my head. And, there's a couple of things that I think you've raised here. One, which is about how important it is for all of us, to feel as though we are the ones telling our stories. Like, it's like our story doesn't have to be, and it can be traumatizing when it is defined by and shared by other people, and we're not involved in that somehow. We're not asked about it. We don't relate to it. There's something really important there, I think, which is some message around the ownership of our stories. Yeah. And so when it comes to you in your practices, we talk about breaking out of the mold. That's what this kind of podcast is around, because I think that's, for me, it's something that's really fundamental to the power of private practice, which is that it gives us the capability. I feel like it gives us that power in our hands to start shifting some of these systems where we feel like something needs to be done differently. But obviously, that can feel exposing. So I just wondered about whether that's been part of your experience. I think a couple of you have alluded to that, feeling as though you're not the only one now feels better than it used to feel. So what have been your experiences about starting to break some of these molds?
I think that's a really interesting question, Wendy. When we think about doing assessments, there's a real tension, I think, because to ensure that they are not challenged and that the outcome can provide access to services or supports that people are eligible for, there's a real tension that we use the international diagnostic manuals that exist, which are both currently really quite deficit focused in their language and their understanding of neurodivergence, whilst wanting to provide an experience for the client that is affirmative, validating, and that they can come away with a sense of being understood and a sense of pride in their identity. As a neurodivergent person. And I think that tension is something that within our practice we routinely touch upon and reconsider and think about in terms of the diagnostic, the tools that we use as part of our assessment, the language that we use in reports. I think that's a tension that's really alive amongst the community of autism and ADHD assessors at the moment.
So on the one hand, having to keep one foot in the current system, let's say, and with the other foot kind of starting to break out of the mold a little bit, and there always being a tension or there being a tension in that currently.
Because most families that come to me, one of their questions is, are your assessments, do local services and schools accept your assessments? So it's pivotal that we find that we tread that tightrope and do it well.
Right. Yeah.
One way that I try to bridge that gap, because I'll always have the conversation, that similar conversation with the parent and the young person. This is going to be medicalized language for parts of your report. Reason for that, and we'll have to put autistic spectrum disorder. You have to put that diagnostic term in there. And that's uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. But I think you can couch that with the trusted relationship and you can have that conversation. But I co-construct my report with every person I work with. So they get a draft. And if there is something they feel they really need to say, so it's not only going to be this medicalised diagnostic report, it's also going to have their voice in there. And we'll also be including other trauma experiences that not being heard. And so the perspective is really useful there as well, because this idea of school trauma is not really understood, that a lot of neurodivergent individuals are experiencing trauma, not only in the school, in the workplace, and in other areas. So that's not really part of a traditional autistic HD assessment. So I think, you're trying to make it as affirming as possible around this medical model, but it's still really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And just to kind of bring you in, Lola, there, because I noticed as well that you're kind of affirming that some of those experiences as well. It's something that you also, that tension that you also have seen with
I was going to
people
say
you work
that.
with.
Yes. I was going to say that that's probably the area where it feels that it really felt like breaking the mold, I think, in terms of assessments, because they are so different from the sort of the more traditional way that I was used to doing them when I worked in teams. And that, sort of that balance, sort of really being careful, checking that you're doing everything that should be done, that no one can challenge. Well, they can challenge them, but sort of giving all the information that it feels a little bit like justifying yourself, sort of making sure that you put all the information that someone reading the report may say, did they ask about this? Or does this, is this sort of nice guidelines compliant? Is it? So there's a lot of work to make it robust enough to, sort of feel like it shouldn't be challenged. But at the same time, giving the person the experience that they wanted. And I think that is one of the things that I find that some of the people who have come for to have an assessment with me, that it was like a process, not therapy, but it was something. It wasn't just the label, it was like, I want someone who understands, and I want to feel validated. So I completely agree with what Katie said, and I'm as well. Yeah, but it feels like really, sort of an exercise where you have to sort of really make sure that you tick all the boxes.
Yeah, and at the same time, really holding this kind of responsibility and privilege as well, I guess, of being a person there to start that is affirming someone, that is validating them, that is helping them to take back the power over their own story, as you said, Emma, about co-creating reports with them and so on. So, yeah. I love that, because it's such a description of almost like the grassroots, day to day, what it looks like to challenge and push back on a system within the mental health sector, right? Where people have been traumatized by the system, and on the one hand, holding that experience with empathy so that it's not a re-traumatizing experience again, and meeting the requirements of the system whilst pushing back on it. I mean, that's such a an incredible description of the kind of challenges of the work that you're doing in your private practices, because part of their reason for being is to challenge the system, as opposed to just, in inverted commas, being there to support people who have been unseen by or damaged by the system.
Yeah, I definitely feel on a completely different level, of course, what some of those clients feel, because, you are pushing back against the system, you are doing things differently, you are challenging what's being said, changing narratives. even a draft report could be seen as not the right way to do it. You should just be writing the report from your expert opinion and delivering it. But it can feel very anxiety provoking. You can feel like you could be challenged for doing this work at the same time, putting your heart and soul into believing in it and wanting to. Someone's got to do the advocacy, haven't they? So it's something that I think we should, as clinicians in these roles, and deeply empathise with that, the level of disempowerment that other clients feel. So how they feel on a daily basis, facing and challenging the system is, huge. Actually, they can feel very hopeless. So there has to be other people at different levels within the system who know the system to be able to do this, but it's hard. Really.
And you all know me, so you'll know that one of the things I say about people in private practice is I think I even have a card that I send out to people as they come onto the programme, which is psychologists in private practice wear their brave pants every day. And so this whole thing of, what helps you to wear your brave pants every day on this? Is it having other practitioners in the practice with you? Is it having these kinds of conversations? What is it that helps you wear those brave pants every day?
That's such a good question, but I would like to just say, I don't know that I do that. Manage to do that every day. So I just like to put my hand up and say I sometimes am able to do that and at other times feel more vulnerable. I think what helps me is being really tuned into autistic voices, because if I hear that what I'm doing is kind of rooted in what autistic voices are saying, then that makes me feel good, or it gives me a course correction if not.
Right.
I'd agree with that. I think that's where the grounding comes from. When you feel sort of unsure of yourself or thinking, what are my colleagues maybe going to think about me, or people that I used to work with in the NHS. And then you see things like, the controversy that's about, it's uncomfortable. But then again, when you listen to the community, it's all there. And so really that's what we're doing, is we're listening, we're doing our job. We're listening to the experience and the narratives of the people we serve and want to work with and want to support. So that gets me very quickly out of a bit of a headspin of doubt sometimes. Not my own doubt, it's society can come back on you.
Yeah.
I agree with what you guys said. I think that's one of the reasons why private practice really works for me, because I have kind of shaped the work I do and what I offer to what's aligned with my values and what I want to be about as a professional and as a psychologist. So, I mean, obviously, sort of doing your research and, sort of listening to the community, to the autistic community, neurodivergent community in general, feedback from clients. It's just such a luxury to be able to tailor and adapt what you do to what you think and what people tell you that is needed. But I think, sort of going back to that tension, isn't it, earlier, where you're trying to do your best, but then also you have to sort of bear in mind what the system or what certain systems are about or value. But I don't know if Katie and Emma have noticed that, but I've also noticed, like, in the last couple of years, there's been such an expansion in terms of, hearing about neurodiversity, and assessments have changed so much. There's so much more emphasis on the person's experience and, this neuroaffirming way of working, with the autistic community. That has been really amazing to be part of it and actually do it, in the way that you believe that is the right way to do it and the helpful way to do it.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess coming to kind of thinking about the hopes for the future, if you're going to think about, how you would, what you're hoping will happen in the coming, few years with respect to the changes you'd like to see in the system, and also just in terms of how you see your own practices developing. What are your hopes for the future around that? I'm going to perhaps come to Lola, if that's okay first. Yeah.
Very good questions, Wendy. All of them make you think a lot. I'm really curious at the moment. There's so much happening at the moment in terms of, sort of social media voices, coming up and out. And I'm really, really curious in terms of what's going to happen, how we are going to shape the future of neurodiversity and services for neurodivergent people. And as I said, in a way, it's really tricky. And I think for me, there's this balance between sort of validating, like, this is your, this is your group, and this is who you are. But then at the same time, taking each person by themselves and not necessarily saying, oh, this person is autistic, so this applies to them, or that applies to them, or they won't benefit from this kind of therapy, or they will benefit from this kind of therapy. So actually, maybe, yes, it's a framework and it's useful to think about neurodivergence, but then at the same time, each person being unique and thinking about what does this person need, so that's part of the process that I am at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that just sounds like such a profoundly important capability for us to develop within our systems as well, that we don't just have this kind of cookie cutter, okay, well, you've got that label now, so this is the suite of things that you get or that you don't get. Like if our systems could have an organizing framework and then an individual focus, like, everyone's going to benefit from that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Emma, how about you for hopes for the future?
They're not dissimilar. I'm very curious. I mean, I kind of almost sometimes imagine the possibility of a kind of redefining of the medical model, and quite a different understanding of this idea of mental health and psychology and psychiatry. I think there's much more to still learn and incorporate. So for me, that would be my ultimate goal. My ultimate outcome would be, that could be, just have another look at that.
Keep chipping away at that scientific paradigm.
Probably more research, using neurodivergent or self-identified neurodivergent individuals as part of that research, because, that has been there's been gatekeepers there, and more clinicians as neurodivergent clinicians. And I think there are many who perhaps don't feel able to say they are as well. So, more inclusivity in those kind of terms. And I think it's the system change really for me, schools as well, to have schools that are more inclusive and less compliance control led, which I know is very relationally traumatizing for many neurodivergent individuals. So, it's to stop the trauma, really, and to look at this with curiosity, not as in, like you said earlier, Wendy, people are doing this with good intention, as a survival response for themselves and for their families, not, looking at their neurodivergence, not because they're out to get anything. I don't know they portrayed as. So,
Awesome. Thank you. And Katie, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, are we allowed to change the world in response to this question?
Go ahead.
Because I think my hopes for the future are that the systems and structures around us don't take people as individuals and respond accordingly. And when that happens, we can dismantle the idea that neurodivergence is part of a mental health thing. And, you know, it can come out of the DSM, the diagnostic manuals, it can come out of the ICD, other diagnostic manuals. And I say it that way around because there's no point in taking it out if actually that's going to mean that people fall between the gaps,
right?
And, you know, and are further harmed.
Yeah.
But both of those changes need to be happening, I think. And wouldn't it be amazing if we weren't needed? If we didn't have to have conversations about neurodivergence and trauma, you know?
Yeah.
So my long-term hope is that I can retire unneeded.
We'll find a new job for you, Katie. Fantastic. Well, yeah, I mean, it's been such an amazing conversation to speak with all of you today, because it really brings home how important it is, I think, for in terms of being able to dismantle systems that are harming people, that actually within our private practices, we all, there is a role for us to play within private practice to do that, that it's not, and the reason why I think that is really important and why I make that link to, you know, practices that are actually very purpose driven is because I know even within our own community of psychologists, there can be a sense that, oh, people go into private practice for kind of selfish reasons. And I see exactly the opposite with everybody that I work with. You know, people go into private practice very often because they fundamentally cannot bear to see something happening that is happening every day. And they want to make a difference with that. And by the way, we do need to make practices that also support and nurture practitioners so that, you know, we can live, that we can live also, you know, happy and effective lives and not be traumatized by our practices as well. But yeah, I've learned so much from this conversation. I've also learned so much over the period of time that I've known you guys, to just in terms of thinking about the world or seeing the world with a different lens as well. And yeah, I'm profoundly grateful to all of you for this conversation, for the various conversations that we've had over the years. So thanks very much. Thanks everyone for listening. A really big grateful thank you to Katie Adolphus, Emma Offord and Lola Perez-Gavino today. Where can we find you all? Katie, where can we find you on social media or internet?
Social media, I'm very much at the beginning. So we do have a Facebook page, the Adolphus Practice. We've got an Instagram account that's the.Adolphus Practice. And they are about to be meaningful as pages and accounts to follow, but they are not there yet.
We'll get lots of followers for you. And what's your website address? We'll put it in the show notes. But
thank you. It's theadolphuspractice.co.uk.
Perfect. Emma, where can we find you?
At the moment, it's divergentlife.co.uk, our website, and Instagram is Divergent Lives.
Awesome. Yeah, I love your Instagram account. And Lola?
So my therapy website is mindmadeeasy.com. And my website for autism assessment is highmaskingautismassessments.com. So not very original, but very straight to the point.
Absolutely.
And I am at the beginning. Yeah, I'm at the beginning of starting, you know, sort of to be a bit more present in social media. Where I've created an account which is called Autisticfully. But I only have one post so far, but lots of ideas that just need to be.
And I've also seen you on LinkedIn as well, so I know that we can connect with you on LinkedIn too.
As well. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for listening. We will see you in next week's episode. Until then, take care and bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'd love to hear what you think about the Inspiring Psychologists podcast. So please take a moment to leave a review and give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It makes a massive difference in helping us to reach new audiences. If, like me, you're feeling inspired and moved by the private practice stories in our podcasts, please spread the word across your own networks. And why not encourage your colleagues and friends to listen to the podcast too? To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, please be sure to subscribe to the Inspiring Psychologists podcast. You can find out more about all my guests from Series 1 at our website, inspiringpsych.com. That's inspiringpsych.com.